Muyang shrugged his shoulders and held Anguish and Wicked God's sword. If Bardas was to start acting again, it was now time to deal with the monster in front of him. It was most difficult to lure you. The twin-head ogre was a mutant. They were different from the albino mutants called Ark, but he could say that they were the top of all ogres. Normally they were active as the owners of the harsh land or high summits, but Muyang did whatever he could to lure them. He made traps, destroyed all its surrounding food, made it starve, and then afterwards disturbed it. He even used 6 out of the 15 days of attacking the dwarf's castle to lure him. It was because he needed its monstrous power to break the gate. Afterwards, the arm of the twin-head ogre started to regenerate. Its strength wasn't just 20 times of a normal ogre, but even his regenerating abilities was also 20 times. A level where this injury was akin to slapping the troll's cheek or gently stepping on it. In simple free-for-all fight he could say twin-head ogre was the strongest. 1 versus 1? Without being crazy, there was no way Muyang would take a chance like that. Prek. The dwarves fired their crossbows and shot a cannon charged with gunpowder. Since they were species who developed mines and mined them, it was obvious that they could handle gunpowder. However, they were ridiculously short on firepower. The twin-head ogre's skin didn't even burn from the mediocre gunpowder explosion. It would be hard to get more backup than this. The place was the reason. They couldn't just explode an unlimited supply of gunpowder inside the castle. If they weren't thinking of dying altogether, this would be all the firepower they could use. It's better that way. From the beginning he didn't really have high hopes. The more their helplessness is proven, it would be used as a good opportunity for him. And if more than consistent attacks overlapped, its defensive power and its regeneration power would all become useless. Thump. Thud. However, the twin-head ogre didn't even give him time to think. It raised its fist and pushed right where Muyang was standing. Muyang barely blocked it, but his body bounced off afar. The speed was also out of the ordinary, and if he was even slightly late to react, his whole body would have turned into dust. Muyang spit out blood mixed with dirt. Seemed like his left arm was out of joint. Crackle. After forcefully pushing his joint back into place, he looked at the twin-head ogre that was running towards him, proclaiming territory. As he mumbled quietly, the surrounding air and the pressure of magic changed. A wide absolute's territory was spread out with Muyang in the middle. A territory-wide authority that weakened individuals prescribed as an enemy and increased Muyang's presence. Swoosh. The moment Muyang lifted his foot, he was behind the twin-head ogre. In a moment of acceleration, Muyang simultaneously pierced 3 acupunctural points. Acupunctural points were the energy pathways of a living body. As the twin-head ogre was also a living being, there could only be pathways where energy flows through. Even though those places might be different, Muyang was considered to be an expert, better than anyone else at killing a living being. Not just humans, but he had already dissected a few tens of thousands of monsters. Exactly 3 seconds. After the acceleration ended, the ogre's calf in between its ribs and behind its head started to bleed all at once. However, it couldn't recover as fast as it could in the past. Recovery means to restore your energy back to normal. Your recovery will obviously slow down if your veins are blocked. Then Muyang looked down at his hands. To pierce through its extremely tough flesh, his hands were wrecked. It was because the returning damage doubled when acceleration was added. At least his bones weren't damaged. Both heads were both releasing their fury. Muyang hastily dodged with his body, but all the surrounding buildings collapsed by a touch of the ogre's monstrous power. Thump. However, the twin-head ogre sat down in its spot. It seemed like the calf Muyang sliced off was quite a blow. Muyang wasn't the type to lose a chance like this. By climbing up a side of a building and going around it quickly, he confused the twin-head ogre's gaze and quickly jumped on it. Like a hawk snatching its prey, he held Anguish with both his hands and turned his body once before stabbing the ogre's eye. The head with its eye stab started to go completely insane. No matter how tough its skin was, the eye tissues could only be thin. Hub. The problem was his fit of raving was rougher than what he thought. Just by grazing, Muyang's body was floating in the air. He barely landed on the ground, but his ribs were completely busted. That moment, the dark aura started to stretch out from Muyang's entire body. It was the lunatic warrior effect which was activated when his life was at risk. However, if there was something that changed from the past, it was that the star of the Absolute reacted. Normally, the lunatic warrior had an effect of using up stamina, but it was because the surrounding red territory was being absorbed into Muyang's body that the injuries were being cured. Muyang smiled after spitting out blood. Activation of the lunatic warrior after just grazing twice. If he simply looked at physical stats, the twin-head ogre would be within the highest rank among the top-ranked monsters. Although its overall stats were low and it was in the high rank, for now it was too much for Muyang to fight. The figures don't balance. There wouldn't be a worst exchange rate besides this. Like this, if he was to allow another attack, his body wouldn't be able to handle it. On the other hand, the twin-head ogre was in a decent shape compared to Muyang. Although he lost sight of one eye, he still had 3 more. It was a worthy monster to be called the strongest in 1 versus 1 fights. However, that was only when it was a 1 versus 1 fight. Taken. Muyang screamed towards the sky. Thump. At the same time, Cerberus fell from the sky. At last you call my name. With his black cape fluttering, the evil spirit predator came down to the ground. Although its flesh was rotten and was now only left with bones, its aura overwhelmed the surroundings. Taken. It was the real name of the evil spirit predator. After Muyang called Taken as if it was nothing, he started to create injuries around his ribs to remove his festered blood. While Cerberus was taking care of the twin-head ogre, Taken spoke as he was lost for words about the scene. But are you truly a Dakibi? Although I am the owner of numerous specters, I have never met someone this determined as you in my lifetime. How can you treat that sort of wound on yourself without changing an expression? Taken was truly overwhelmed. There were no specters that weren't determined. However, among a few thousands of specters, there were no one as determined as Muyang. Like when Muyang pushed himself almost to his death and called for him. Muyang tossed a chilly gaze and spoke. We need to minimize the damage while gaining control over it. Teske, I understand. Just trust me. No matter how strong it is, he is not an opponent for me, the evil spirit predator. Taken stepped forward, full of confidence. He was going to win it on a 1 versus 1 fight, something which Muyang couldn't do. As the Cerberus stepped aside, Taken was next. The specters overlapped his sword and black flames rose. He ran straight towards Twin-Head Ogre and faced it face to face. Thump. Taken's sword pierced through its chest, but he had bounced off far away and was shoved against a wall. Taken got up from the collapsed building and spoke as he became embarrassed. I think some surrounding buildings will collapse. By the look of it, it seemed like it was going to be hard for Taken alone to minimize the damage. Just in time, Muyang was now ready to move a bit. Muyang stepped forwards and started to talk. 2 of us will stop him. Taken turned his head. You're telling me to do something like that? That's most effective. However, Muyang wasn't willing to accept Taken's complaint at all. There was a high chance that he would only leave a bad impression to Bartas if he was to burn down the place. Muyang going out alone in the beginning to fight and his efforts on trying to reduce the damages were all nothing more than a sort of a show. A plan to make Bartas feel helpless and then to make him ask for his help. Although it is his final goal to find a solution to Dark Dragon Barca together, if the infrastructure crumbles, it would be reversed. Swoosh. With the strong wind, Muyang ran like the storm. Although he didn't fully recover, he was burning his last bit of flames left. Taken shook his head. He's quite a monster. Dwarves didn't even dare to approach the Twin-Head Ogre. Even if they poured gunpowder from afar, it was a situation where they couldn't even make a dent on it. For the dwarves who were completely exhausted to stand up to the twin-head ogre, the wall was too high. Were the dwarves this weak? No. Bardas shook his head. There were many valiant dwarf warriors. Just as they lived a life quite far from the battle for a long time, they just became weak. It was obvious for them to lose their bravery since they always ran away from the dragon. But Bardas's eyes touched the two figures who were fighting violently. The Dakibi and the Death Knight. There wasn't any other combination that clashed more. Even more. Although the Dakibi had serious injuries that could kill him, he didn't stop to rest but continued to run towards it. Even though he was like a reckless tiger moth, his bravery must be recognized. The thing we lost, that Dakibi has. Thrilled Bardas. It has been too long since he had seen a warrior fight like that. While it was so long that he couldn't even remember, there were dwarves who could fight like the Dakibi. Although they were the first to die by the dragon and none were left. He didn't think the bravery would be reminded by the Dakibi. But at last both heads of the twin-head ogre were sliced off and it fell to the ground. The Dakibi and the Death Knight both sliced one off each. It was a greatly satisfying victory. Who are you guys? Bardas couldn't help but ask. Either way, it was true that he did get their help. Bardas wasn't that lost to all sense of shame to ignore them. However, the Dakibi didn't even glance at Bardas. He was lost in thought as he collected the twin-head ogre's heads and rubbed his cheek. Is he ignoring me? Bardas's express was clouded with anger. For someone who was respected as God Hand, it has been a while for someone to give him this kind of humiliation. Even when Muyang mentioned Heimdall, he got on his nerves, but he was now publicly ignoring to see him. It was at that moment. The Lord of the Three Pickaxe Sack Alliance, God Hand Bardas. The top blacksmith of the Golden Hammer tribe Kalmu greets you. Kalmu, who hurriedly ran towards Bardas, kneeled in front of him. Then Bardas's expression changed. Kalmu, I have heard of you before. There was an exchange with the Golden Hammer tribe not too long ago. Please excuse my owner's rudeness. It is because when he focuses on something, he just can't focus on anything else. Owner, are you saying that towards the Dakibi? Once again, Bardas's expression contorted. Dwarves were especially sensitive to the word slave, as there were many species that were greedy over their special skills in handling iron. Then Kalmu explained, I have been locked up in the underground arena with my son. However, my son was killed by a devil and the person who avenged him for me was my current owner. Please do not reprove him, as it was something I decided for myself. My owner wants to become a help to God Hand Bardas. It was the reason why he quickly ran here after realizing that the twin-head ogre came close to this place. Thump. The Dakibi Muyang stood beside Kalmu. If there was anything strange, it was that while he was looking elsewhere, the twin-head ogre's heads vanished into thin air. And on Muyang's necklace, a smaller version of the twin-head ogre's head was hanging. I am Muyang. I have watched well of the dwarfs fight. I have heard that Heimdall was a battle god which dwarves served. Indeed, it was true. After a short introduction, he continued to flatter him. Bardas could feel his cheeks glowing. Fight? Could it even be called a fight? It was better said to call it a joke. In the end, wasn't it the Dakibi and Death Knight who handled the twin-head ogre? On the contrary, they dishonored the battle god Heimdall. Cough. However, since Muyang had singled out that part and flattered him about it, he had nothing to say. Then Kalmu spoke again. Bardas, this isn't the time to share words. Barca is coming. Dark Dragon Barca? It wouldn't find this place. Kalmu fiercely shook his head. No. Barca already found this place. Only it changed its strategy. Didn't monsters invade this place for a few days and not just today? That is true. But you're saying they are the acts of Barca? Yes, Barca is behind all of this and was controlling the monsters. If you don't take action, you will suffer. 20 days ago, we had seen Barca fly towards the north. We even reached this place from following Barca. Bartas slightly knitted his brows. Barca, that was known to have no patience, destroyed their protecting wall and called the monsters? He couldn't easily believe him but didn't think that Kalmu would lie. There was no reason for him to. If he saw it 20 days ago and came to this place, the timing was also roughly right. We need to change our location. Bardas carefully made a conclusion. However, without any preparation, it was impossible to face the dark dragon. However, Kalmu was still pessimistic. It's too late. Barca is currently enjoying blockading this place while it sees a decline in dwarf numbers. It probably knew you were going to run away. Do you think it didn't make plans for it? That was also true. Bartas squeezed his brows. Dragons had high intelligence. To get back at all his suffering, it might be playing with them. Before Bartas could get lost in his thoughts, Kalmu made an offer. We will help. Let us help you. How? Although the Dakibi and that Death Knight seem quite strong, the strength of dragons is on another level. Then Myung stepped forward. I have the heart of the phoenix, dragon bones, and a piece of the earth dragon's skin. Make me an armor that can withstand the dragon's attack. Using the heart of the phoenix to make an armor? Don't you have the demon dragon lethal cannon? The cannon that can give a sufficient blow to the dragon. If I buy some time, you should have enough time to blast a shot at it. How did you? Bardas could not repress his astonishment. Demon Dragon Lethal Cannon was a cannon made to kill demon dragons. However, it was sealed as an ancient relic and Bardas had recently lifted the seal. Words couldn't explain its destructive power, but the problem was that it took too long to blast. If the opponent was Dark Dragon Barca, it was enough time for him to notice the unexpected change and for it to avoid the attack. That was why they left it to rust, but it was still an item that required great secrecy. He became confused as to how Myung knew of this item. It was when he was about to glance suspiciously at Myung. My owner is the ruler of all the Dakibis. He sometimes looks through the truth which no one knows of. Even coming here was to stop the future that is heading towards destruction. Kalmu added an adequate amount of flavor to his words. In reality, from Kalmua's perspective view, Myung didn't know anything and openly acted as if he could see the future. Myung was a wise owner. Kalmu believed that Myung could definitely find a way for everyone to benefit. That was why he could lie without any hesitation to Bartas. As currently his owner was Myung. You say? You are talking about the position that is chosen through the Dakibi's ceremony. Only then did Bartas look at Myung differently. It was clear that he knew well of However, if he was he was the owner of a few 10,000 Dakibis. He was unsure for what reason Myung came alone, but instead of filling the numbers with weak Dakibis, it's better to have one who is good. His skills were already proven. The desperate fight against the twin head ogre. He saw scenes like when Myung cured his own horrendous wound. Bardas remembered the vivid scenes. However, it was unknown if he could buy time against a dragon. Bardas looked at Myung. A look without an inch of hesitation. He couldn't really know what Myung's thoughts were, but at the end, there was an abyss. He has already witnessed his bottom. And those people had their own creed. Indeed. He could say that he was the ruler of Dakibis. On top of that, since Kalmu followed Myung, he had more trust in him. The Golden Hammer tribe was known to be sincere and credible. They didn't really follow others, but for those who were worthy, the Golden Hammer tribe were the type of dwarves who gave out all they had. I will make you an armor. However, it will take time. Although Bardas managed the dwarves harshly, he was undoubtedly the blacksmith known as God Hand. There was no way he would do a rough job in creating an equipment. However, Bardas was asking what Myung would do if something was to happen by chance during that time. Myung shrugged his shoulders. I will train them. Train. Dwarves were originally born with warrior's blood. When you look at past literature, there are stories that explain how dwarves easily captured dragons. Although dwarves were famous for being blacksmiths, they undoubtedly had the characteristics of warriors who wore the equipment they made. Only, there were just so many who were after the dwarves that they had to live a long life of fleeing that they lost their tendency. The fear and horror of being a fugitive had suppressed their instincts. And Muyang knew well of a way to calm those emotions. Bardas's eyes slightly shook. It wasn't like he didn't know of these ancient stories as well. However, he considered them as nonsense. The superiority among the species was too clear. There was truly a limit to their origin. Bardas was the one who was just satisfied to use his handcraft in order to toy with the dragon. If the dwarves could hunt the dragon, there was no reason for them not to. They were only half given up because they concluded that they couldn't hunt dragons. How long are you planning to run away? The reason why the dragons are disregarding the dwarves and continuously attacking is because you guys don't fight back. A chance to fight isn't always given. Muyang's cold but sharp words pierced through his heart. An enemy who doesn't fight back. Is there an easier target than this? Just running away wasn't everything. In reality, although dragons were strong and arrogant monsters, they were quite careful about choosing their prey. If the dwarves were actively counterattacking and were successful in landing a hit, the dragons wouldn't easily meddle with them. So fight. Life is a battle and a continuous fight. However, it wasn't like a chance was always given. If they were to give up even this chance, they would forever live a life as fugitives. Muyang was telling them so. Bardas's body was shaking fiercely. Plot against a dragon? He had thought of it countless times but never put it to action. If someone else said this, he would have regarded as rubbish and ignored the person, but the words of the Dakibi Infram of him were strangely persuasive. He had more sincerity than anyone else, and for some reason, the words he spoke of made him imagine them as though they were going to happen in real life. It was an effect made by the combination of Muyang's fighting aura, purity, and star of the absolute. Normally, Bardas would think about it more carefully before making a decision, but his rationality had become very blunt after fighting with monsters for 15 days. I will make you the world's sturdiest armor that can sufficiently block a dragon's attack. I will make dwarves into the world's bravest warriors. A deal was accepted. Muyang held out his hand, and when their hands met, the counterattack had started. Muyang thought of a systematic training method for the dwarves. As their species were different, they needed a different training method as well. Dwarves were an unfortunate species with short arms and short legs. However, their stamina was good, and most of all, they had the backbone. Even from the start, they were able to follow a fairly intense training. The best way to remove fear is to push them so that they don't have any other thoughts. Pushing them to their limits and in secret removing the fear they had of dragons. So that when they are faced with a dragon, they wouldn't be as nervous. If Muyang had to buy time with just his strength, no matter how good the armor was, it would have been impossible. However, if the 30,000 dwarves actively took part in the battle, he could definitely bear it. It would be quite worth seeing when I add the dragon's head to my skull accessory collection. Muyang slightly lowered his head and looked at his skull accessory. The thing that wrapped around Muyang's neck like a necklace had a miniature version of the twin-head ogre's head. It was the equipment he earned from the relic storage of the Murloc King, and when a head was added, his stats also rose. And depending on how you use it, it was a necklace that could display an effect much better than what it was ranked. As he looked more closely, a description about it appeared. Name: Skull Accessory. Rank A. Classification: A-Keepable Type. Durability: 16,842. Effect: it was an accessory used by the Lunatic Lich. As of now, there is only one skull, but you can increase the number of skulls to at most 5. To increase the number, you can extract the head of your opponent and use this necklace to automatically minimize it into a skull that will be added to the necklace. Asterisk: your stats increase by the number of heads you extort. Asterisk: currently, 2 types of heads are equipped. Asterisk: head of Jukchiho, strength agility +4. Asterisk: head of twin-head ogre, strength +15. An effect that increased the strength by 15 was added. This couldn't be the end. At most 5. He was still able to add 3 types of heads. He couldn't even imagine what kind of effect he would receive if he was to add the dragon's head. Are you really planning to put those on them? From the side, Kalmu worriedly asked as he held a heavy iron ball. Dwarves had exceptional stamina. It would take time to push them. That was why he was going to experiment their limits using heavy iron balls. In the beginning they might oppose him, but in time they would feel a sense of kinship. When will they be finished? Since it isn't really a difficult job and a lot of dwarves are working on it, it should be finished in half a day, but isn't that something you put on slaves? Dwarves are currently no different than slaves. If they don't become strong enough to break free on their own, they will forever live as slaves. Kalmu quietly nodded his head. This iron ball was literally a type of trial. It was his goal to make them fight on their own instead of as slaves. Muyang closed his eyes and sunk into meditation. Although the surface injuries from the twin-head ogre had healed, his inner parts were wrecked. To stabilize this, he needed to look into his inner parts. It was quite a sight to see 30,000 dwarves wearing heavy iron balls. And it was unexpected when the amount of backlash was less than what he had expected. Was it because of the Lord of the Alliance Bartas supported Muyang? While Bartas was making the armor, Kalmu and Muyang suddenly became the second in command. This was also possible because Bartas was in good control over the Alliance. It turned out well. If he could start right away, there was nothing better than this. The iron ball constantly produced a sound whenever dwarves moved. It was an obvious thing considering how something weighing over 50 kilograms was attached to both legs. While everyone was curious as to what kind of training he was going to teach, Muyang spoke briefly. Run. After running around the castle for half of the day, all the dwarves laid flat onto the ground. However, just running wouldn't be all of it. Fight against each other. I will form ranks in numbers of tens, hundreds, and thousands. By placing ranks and dividing the numbers into small, medium, and large, he was planning to use it effectively. Since the dwarves didn't have this kind of system, they weren't able to react quickly in case of an emergency. Didn't they waste a lot of time when the gate was opened by being confused? He couldn't see it happen again. Dwarves stole glances at one another. Azura's path. But it wasn't like there was no way. Muyang opened his Azura's path. Murloc King Merduden and numerous mad specters popped out. Oh ho, they're tasty-looking dwarves. Make them fight. Are you not making them into specters? No. That's disappointing. As Merduden smacked his lips and starting to move, the specters also started to spread. Smack. The mad specters of Azura Path started to meddle with Dwarf's mind, and as one started to move, in an instant, 30,000 dwarves started to fight with each other. Looking at how they were so helpless against the mind-controlling type, Muyang couldn't help but laugh, but it meant that they were at their limits mentally. Muyang nodded his head and waited for the fight to end. Besides simply being strong internally, they were also given hardship. It was the invasion of monsters. Muyang needed to continuously lure monsters since he might have been found suspicious if monsters stopped invading after his arrival. And that part was played by Wuhi and the undead. Although they were a bit late, they brought a few tens of Jiakio. Jiakio were monsters with red fur and looked similar to huge lions. They were more famous by their nickname Ruthless Hunter. Jiakio can ravage dwarves more cruelly than a dragon. If you don't fight, you will suffer. With his arms crossed, Muyang looked on. By slowly degrading the dragon, he was planning to lower their fear of the dragon from their impression. From continuously pushing the dwarves without rest, their reason was half gone. As the specters consistently stimulated the dwarves that they were in tip-top shape. If they don't fight, they will become prey. Everything was a continuous battle. Dwarves were slowly understanding this. Jiakio, that felt something strange, moved back a step. However, in an instant the dwarves surrounded the Jiakio. Truly, the dwarves have the disposition to become warriors. At last, their hidden potential started to bloom. There was an effect from cornering them. Mad. They needed to become mad. They couldn't survive unless they were mad. After a month, the dwarves were completely altered. Bardas, who showed up after a month of seclusion, couldn't help but widen his eyes. Hiya. Die. Kayahaha. As if they were holding real weapons, they were really fighting as their life depended on it. He couldn't find the simpleness they had before, and instead they were full of spite. It seems like the armor is finished. As Muyang slowly approached Bartas and spoke, Bartas stammered. What happened? Didn't I say that I will make them into warriors? Warriors? Gulp. Bartas gulped his saliva. They were true warriors. However, no matter how he looked at them, they didn't seem like normal warriors. This was still a great improvement. By looking at how the corpses of monsters were piled up in the middle, it seemed like he had really trained the dwarves properly. Take this. It's the armor made from the heart of the phoenix. Black freckles were all around Bartas's eyes. It was because he didn't sleep for a month and devoted himself to creating this. With his exhausted expression, he passed the armor he brought heavily. Soon Muyang's eyes became conspicuous. At last. As he lifted the armor structured with dragon bones, a hot fire engulfed Muyang. As if it was alive, the heart of the armor was pumping. Muyang's heart also started to pump as he looked at the armor. It's hot. Small flames were splattering on the armor. A phoenix was a monster that reached the limits of fire. Since all its strength came from its heart, it was an obvious thing. Bartas spoke as he smacked his lips. I have seen the heart of the phoenix a few times, but I haven't seen one like that. It didn't simply have fire but had all kinds of characteristics. Where did you even find this? Headley's cow was able to transform however it wanted. Transforming into any living thing, Headley's cow became it. Its greatest form was the phoenix, but it didn't have any limitation to attributes. As Muyang didn't reply, Bartas continued to talk as if he knew Muyang wouldn't. Either way, that armor is incomplete. It's incomplete? This time Muyang's voice became quieter. The armor he received was spotless and had a beautiful exterior. At least to Muyang's eyes, it didn't have a problem internally or externally. However, Bartas was God hand. His opinion was probably right. If it was incomplete, he needed to know why. It means it doesn't have a specific characteristic. Right now, the energy of fire is strong and is suppressing the other characteristics, but that wouldn't last long. Then what happens? I'm not sure. It could get destroyed, lead the user to a path of self-destruction, or even drag them to subterranean. The subterranean was the world where shadow monsters lived. It was also called the hidden world, and there was no appearance of monsters that weren't strong. Like the time when a shadow criminal appeared in the trial of the destructive powers would toy with everyone. Muyang slightly anticipated that the 11 Masters of Darkness might be the shadows that are active in the hidden world. Also, there was no standard as to when the subterranean opened and closed. Just that in a time, in a place, a rift was created, and when it linked to the subterranean, the shadows from that place flooded out. There were a considerable number of normal people who were dragged to the subterranean. Bartas was talking about that subterranean. They say that the subterranean was born from chaos. Bartas meant that sort of chaos might occur due to the armor. Either way, it wasn't an ending Muyang wanted. Is there a way to fix the characteristics? The blood of the user. Basically, by imprinting your blood. Since it's an item you are going to be using, you can fix the characteristics so that it matches you. It will become a finished armor only you could put on. The problem is, an armor only Muyang could wear. It was what he wanted. A customized armor meant that it could display that much efficiency. But he noticed Bartas's last words. Bartas let out a deep sigh as Muyang met eye to eye with him. If your distinct characteristic is weaker than the heart of the phoenix, you will be devoured by it. Your body could burn in an instant and disappear. Even I have no idea why that kind of armor was created. Not a magical sword but a magical armor, huh? If it was used for something, it was for a type of weapon that could pierce someone. There were barely any cases where it happened for an armor. And items that were known as magical swords were swords normally restricted to the user and demonstrated power. From the beginning, armors were items that existed to protect the user. There was no reason why it would be jinxed. However, Bartas called this armor a magical armor. Do you want to devour me? Muyang quietly looked at the armor. The small flames crawled higher and were now about to touch Muyang's shoulders. As if it was starving, it was desiring Muyang's source itself. Muyang couldn't help but to quietly laugh. A mere armor is aiming for his life. An armor born to be worn was trying to kill him. Only laughter came out at this self-contradicting situation. Knock it off. Muyang instantly wiped his smile off. Slowly he started to put on the armor. Bardas, who watched him, widened his eyes. Wait. You can't just thoughtlessly wear it. That armor is jinxed. If you wear it before taming it, it would definitely harm you. Bardas was in a hurry. He was God Hand. There was no way he would have made an armor carelessly. If anything, he could say it was a better result than normal. However, to be clear, that armor was incomplete. To bring out an armor that no one could wear, it was a shameful thing to Bardas. Only because he didn't have time, because he made a promise, he just didn't have a choice. But he never thought that Muyang would just wear it right away. However, Muyang didn't listen to a word Bardas said. Blizzy. Instantly, Muyang's whole body started to burn after he finished putting the armor on. The flames permeated and ripped his skin. As the running blood permeated the armor, the flames burned more fiercely. Soon Muyang had the image of a huge flame reflected in his mind. That was the heart of the phoenix. It was the will of the heart to devour Muyang. You cannot consume me. However, to Muyang, an equipment was no more than a tool to him. A tool to kill someone and protect himself. He didn't need a will from a tool he was going to use. Just follow. The blood that was permeated into the armor became a medium in which Muyang made his command. A small will suddenly became greater. All of a sudden, Muyang's will surpassed the image the heart of the phoenix gave. The heart was the armor's ego. If it was a normal person, it would have tried to oppress the ego and comfort it. However, Muyang's thoughts were different. Equipment didn't need a will. Equipment shouldn't have a will. Ego was an authority only given to the user of the equipment. How the equipment was going to be used was dependent on the user. Even more, it already showed its teeth. Muyang burned the ego the armor had. He removed it. Kaya. Was it the phoenix or the headless cow? The armor screamed its death throes. Muyang planted his strength in the place where its ego was. It was his strength of death. Since he had already come back from the dead, it was the strength only Muyang could display. It was at that moment. Immortal King's breastplate has been completed. The color of the flames coming out from the armor changed to black. A breastplate that looked as if a black fog was spurting out. As he stood there and watched, the information about the armor popped out. Name: Immortal King's breastplate. Rank: plus. Classification: equipable type. Endurance: not destroyable. Effect: the one that doesn't die. A breastplate that relishes the strength of the Immortal King. Asterisk: only equipable by the user Muyang. Asterisk: strength plus 15. Asterisk: fighting aura plus 30. Asterisk: stamina plus 50. Asterisk: magic resistance plus 80. Asterisk: depending on the fighting aura, natural healing abilities increase. Currently plus 154%. When you get 3 equipment with the strength of the Immortal King, all stats plus 50. When you get 5 equipment with the strength of the Immortal King, you can use Death Reversal once. Muyang continuously checked the information of the armor. There was a big difference between an A rank and an S rank. And from S rank, each existence of A+ made that much greater a difference. What Muyang anticipated was A+++ rank to at most an S rank. Even if he had the memorize of his past, an equipment that great, that would be impossible to get unless he had incredible luck. But S+ rank? It even had the stats that suited its rank. Muyang's whole body shivered lightly. Only a very few guilds had this kind of equipment. It was a reality for someone to not get even a glimpse unless they were a leader of a clan or a guild. Top 10 of the humans or special people like Wang Chunglin would possess an item like that. Since the weak would only get robbed of treasures. If someone was to discover Muyang right now, they would think of a way to try and kill him and take his armor. There were a countless number of people who were stronger than Muyang. He just finished his first metamorphosis. He needed to achieve at least the third metamorphosis in order to even place his foot in the circle of strong people. Fortunately, this was the demon god's territory. Also, only Muyang could wear the armor. It meant that he currently didn't have to worry about his treasure. It's a set equipment. And on top of that, there was even a set option. When he put on 3 or 5 equipment, there was an added effect. He was most curious about the death reversal, which occurred when he collected 5 equipment. Since it was only effective once, it was most likely an ability to refuse death. The power of revival was impossible even for a saint who displayed a miracle through a wish. To soundly revive a dead person. It wasn't possible. Unless it was an undead. The wish, that destroyed a few Demon King forces, was unable to revive a person. If Muyang's prediction was correct, this was something anyone would be shocked by. Having a life reserved, just by that, it was more fascinating than anything else. The moment this information was leaked, all the huge organizations would madly run for it. On top of that, as monstrous stats were added, Muyang felt as if his head cleared out. He felt as though he had a slight taste of the next wall. Instantly he opened his status viewer and found the reason why. Sets dash. Strength 198, 115 plus 83. Agility 162, 109 plus 53. Stamina 210, 108 plus 102. Intelligence 116, 74 plus 42. Wisdom 112, 70 plus 42. Fighting Aura 154, 66 plus 88. Magic Resistance 202, 54 plus 148. Spirit Ability 101, 53 plus 48. His stamina passed 200. It was no way near in terms of pure stats, but due to different continuous effect and equipment effect, it has doubled. Strength was also near the figure. Like this, the supporting stats will surpass the pure stats. He seemed pleased with the results. But he wasn't planning to neglect his own development. The characteristic of the armor completely changed. As he turned his gaze, Bartas murmured as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Besides getting rid of the phoenix's ego, Muyang filled it with his own color. Was this possible? The monstrous strength the heart had was completely dyed. The armor that was incomplete was now complete. Just by Muyang putting it on, it happened. It was something he never thought of. The ruler of Dakyabes. Was that really all? What kind of magic did you use to suppress the strength of a phoenix? With a small smile, Muyang looked at Bartas. Equipment are just tools. Bartas hesitated. He couldn't agree. He was a dwarf, and the equipment that was born from his hands were all like his children. The words of it just being a tool became a dagger and pierced through his heart. However, Muyang only smiled coldly. If he was to empathize with tools that are supposed to become and move as his hands and feet, he would be swayed at that moment. It was the reason why he erased the ego of the phoenix. Bartas, the Lord of the Alliance. Is the demon dragon lethal cannon ready? Muyang changed the subject. Making the dwarves into warriors was near complete, and he had earned the immortal king's breastplate. Now all that was left was the dark dragon Barca. To stop his attack. He didn't think that Barca wouldn't be able to find this place. It would definitely attack before the start of the devil's long night. Bartas let out a deep sigh and nodded his head. I tried to reduce the time for it to blast, but I still need 60 seconds. It's enough time for the dragon to notice and escape. 30 seconds. What? Reduce it to 30 seconds. For the duration of that time, I will definitely hold Barca back. Muyang boasted. Barca wouldn't invade the location right away. However, it was at most 2 months. Barca knew almost correctly of the dwarf's location and was moving towards them. After roaming around a few times, it would head north. He needed to find a solution by then. A second would determine the victory. Muyang's eyes sunk deeply. 1 second. Even by a shorter time than that, the winner and loser would be determined. Even if he used all his strength, he couldn't be certain. All his muscles were a bit contracted and then relaxed as he let out his tension. The war against the dark dragon Barca had already started. Wuhi pouted out her lips. She was luring the monsters because of Muyang's favor, but it was harder than she had expected. Wuhi doesn't want to work. Blazing Avenger. Wuhi was whining while she sat on the flame mutant's shoulder. From the start, Wuhi was extremely lazy. If she was diligent, she wouldn't have taken that long in creating the endless battlefield. So Wuhi pondered. Was there anything else new? The undead just followed orders, and it was when she was becoming bored from luring the monsters. Oh, what is that? It was when she was searching above the snow to find the next opponent. A black box came into her sight. It's a mimic. After realizing what the box was, Wuhi's eyes sparkled. Mimic was a box-type monster. Normally, it was like a security magic placed on treasure boxes by high-rank magicians. It was a monster created to automatically defend against those who touched the box. She didn't know why a mimic was in a place like this, but that wasn't what Wuhi was interested in. Wuhi instantly straightened her hand and ordered the mutants. Step on that. Or. Mutants slowly moved and surrounded the mimic. Mimics normally popped out of the box when someone tries to open it, but as the mutants trampled on it with their monstrous strength, it didn't have the ability to hold on. Soon as sparkling gold coins popped out in between the half-destroyed box, Wuhi quickly flew and held them with her hands. Wuhi. Rings, circlets, and gold with patterns she couldn't recognize. Wuhi was clearly a female. She liked sparkling things. Tingle. Soon treasures poured out and Wuhi plunged on top. Ah, so comfy. If I have a house, I want it decorated like this. With the treasures as her bed, Wuhi looked up to the sky with her arms crossed. If she could earn a house, Wuhi had a small dream to completely fill it with treasures like this. A house that was more wonderful and glamorous than anyone else's. Husband, let's live beautifully. Woohee. She couldn't stop laughing just by imagining her golden future. If she had a huge house full of treasures and Muyang, she didn't think she would have anything to envy in this world. It was at that moment. Swoosh. A huge black living thing flew past like an arrow in the sky. In the surroundings there were numerous flying-type monsters. Since it happened unexpectedly, Wuhi couldn't react right away. However, Wuhi's face could only harden after seeing the trajectory drawn in the cloud. Ah, Dark Dragon Barca. The Dark Dragon Barca showed itself on the north side. It has been 68 days since he entered the castle. Fight with your life on the line. I will make you realize that a dragon isn't such a big deal. Muyang continued to train dwarves at an intense level. He grouped them into tens and made them attack him. Thump, thump. Dwarves were smacking their shields and swords rhythmically. Dwarves were monsters only in the mid-level, but if they were to wear good equipment, they would exhibit a strength greater than that. Even if it was 10, Muyang could not let his guard down. Without the Immortal King's breastplate, it would have been hard. Muyang's true strength came from the specters and the undead. However, Muyang faced the dwarves with only his own strength. There the Immortal King's breastplate shined. First, overwhelming defensive ability. The dwarves' attacks couldn't even make a small dent. Not just the dwarves, but it was strong enough to even nullify evil spirit predator Taken's attack. But I'm not unbeatable. The user Muyang knew this. That he couldn't fully block the Dark Dragon Barca's attack. Indestructible was only true in terms of natural factors. It meant that it couldn't be destroyed if the endurance level was worn out. If it was to receive an impact externally, there was no equipment that wouldn't break or shatter. However, as his natural healing abilities greatly increased, he felt like he became a troll. The consumed stamina normally returned back to normal with about an hour or two of rest. Most wounds healed within half a day. Only if I could collect the said equipment. All he did was put on the armor, but Muyang's strength increased rapidly. He couldn't even imagine how strong he might be if he was to collect 4 more equipment that relinquished the strength of the Immortal King. However, this was the part Muyang was unsure on. He inwardly shook his head. Why it had the strength of the Immortal King and why it was considered as a set equipment. Immortal King. He never even heard of the name. If it was Mu Young who already experienced death once, in some ways he could be considered immortal. However, he didn't believe his strength could exhibit that much of a distinct characteristic. When he thought back, it felt strange. If he was told to reenact it, he probably couldn't. To suppress the heart of the phoenix and to fill it with his own color. He felt as though he acted as if he was bewitched by someone. Thump, thump, thump. Dwarves smacked their shields and weapons loudly. Before fighting, it was kind of a way of showing respect to Mu Young. It was dwarves' traditional way of saying they acknowledged Mu Young as a true warrior. Then the 10 dwarves lifted their feet. Mu Young got rid of his distracting thoughts and focused on the fight. If it wasn't for Wu He who suddenly appeared, he would have been fiercely fighting a tight match. Husband. Husband. Something big happened. With gold rings on her neck and gold necklaces around her belly, Wu He hurriedly flew towards him. What's wrong? Gulp. As Mu Young asked, Wu He gulped her saliva. Itchy. There's a big problem. This isn't the time for us to be like this. This isn't the time for us to be like this? Barca appeared. Wu He's words had a huge ripple effect. Dark Dragon Barca. He finally appeared. Including Muyug, all the dwarves surrounding him started to make a noise. However, they weren't scared like the last time. It's the effect of brainwashing. Secretly, Mu Young brainwashed the dwarves that the dragon wasn't such a big deal. By pushing them to their limits and speaking a word afterwards was enough. The words that were engraved in their minds controlled their instincts before they knew it. Mu Young asked with a straight face. And its location? It's almost here. It's probably getting ready. Wu He tried her best to approach it, but Barca became aware and so she couldn't. Instead, I saw other monsters. There were wyverns, wind riders and thunder bats. Gibberish. Wu He's body was shivering. It couldn't be helped as it wasn't like fairies could dodge all attacks. Monsters that were born as half-transcendental species like the dragon could destroy fairies or the trials the fairies created. Since there were already numerous fairies who were attacked by the dragon in the past, it would be a lie if she said she wasn't afraid. However, she took courage and checked nearby. Good work. Mu Young placed his hand on top of Wu He's head. Then Wu He's shivers slowly stopped. Afterwards he turned around and yelled. Prepare for the castle war. This fight was going to be the castle war that would end this long and tiresome relationship between the dwarves and the dragon. Thump. The dwarves were stomping their shields onto the ground with a hardened look on their faces. The dragon was no longer an opponent they needed to avoid as they were reborn as warriors through Mu Young. It was a hardship they need to face and win. It was at that moment. Dwarves' Castle War. It just popped up as a quest. It meant that if he was to solve this, there would be a lot of advantages to be earned. However, it wasn't an easy task. The dark dragon Barca is accompanied by monsters. Dragons were normally monsters that moved alone. However, he could handle so many monsters depending on how he looked at things. The dragon was that sort of existence. One of the monsters that were at the top of the food chain. If it was accompanied by those numbers, it meant that it was determined to destroy the dwarves. Probably was really enraged by being toyed with by Bartas. Go up the castle. Get the cannon ready. The dwarves started to move in an organized order. With Mu Young's help, their system had changed and allowed them to distribute the work more effectively. Although it has only been 68 days, they were desperate. Then a huge castle wall over a good 20 meters shined and a magical barrier was created. It was a wall built to maximize the defense against the dragon's attack. It wouldn't collapse easily. Dwarves climbed up the castle wall and loaded a few hundred cannons. The rest of the dwarves protected the cannons or held a crossbow. We must win. Mu Young squeezed his fists to the point it was as if his bones would shatter. Even if he was to exhibit all of his ability, he wasn't sure if he could win. However, he needed to. Even if it wasn't possible, he needed to make it possible. Hunt the dragon. It doesn't lack to be my opponent as the king of the specters. I feel impatient already. Taken. The evil spirit predator and one that managed Cerberus was truly strong. However, he had a critical weakness. He couldn't recognize his opponent's strength and would attack. If Bardas was to attack it now, he would only be beaten to death. I need you to do something else. Myung spoke coldly. Then Taken tilted his head. Wasn't it my task to handle the dragon? Not now. Then. I need you to disperse the enemies. With the mutants, attack the enemy's rear. The dark dragon Barca didn't know any tactics or strategies. He would probably rush into it at once. However, that would be dangerous. The number of enemies was greater than he thought, and the flying-type monsters were basically natural enemies of the dwarves. He needed to disperse the numbers even by a little to raise his chance of winning. Taken accepted with difficulty. I don't like it as a king, but if you want it I shall. But Myung, are you planning to stay here? I will command from here. The reason why the dwarves changed was solely because of Myung. If Myung was to vacate his place, their fighting spirit would greatly decrease. It was also Myung's first time in leading and fighting with this great of a number. However, he couldn't do a shabby job just because it was something he had never done before. Swoosh. Myung took out Anguish and the wicked god's sword. At the same time, small spots started to flood in from the sky. And the dark dragon Barca was in the lead. I will beat you. It wasn't like he hadn't fought a dragon in the past. When he was facing the Dragon Lord, the demon dragon was the biggest obstacle. Its armor was outstanding, and even its existence was so powerful that it could even hunt transcendental species. However, even the powerful demon dragon wasn't complete. In the end, the Dragon Lord was assassinated by Myung, and afterwards the demon dragon had also died. When they were together, he thought they were unbeatable, but once he faced them individually, it wasn't as hard as he expected. This fight was in a much better position than that time. At least there were lots of options Myung could use. Although his current strength fell far short from his past strength, compared to the hardships in the past, it was easier. Myung focused on Barca. Royer. The dark dragon Barca spouted out a rough breath. The dark dragon Barca let out a heavy breath. It was a dragon's strongest attack, called the dragon's breath. Roar. The huge castle walls started to shake. Amazingly, the castle walls which God Hand Bardas devoted himself in making didn't collapse right away. Dozens of magic barriers overlapped and rose. It was protecting them from the dragon's breath. Beautiful. The scene of dozens of blue magical barriers rose all together was quite beautiful in Myung's eyes. The number was exactly 50. It was no different than having 50 walls placed very closely together with only a thin gap in between them. Bardas was truly worthy to be called God Hand. It was possible only because he had the knowledge of both construction and magic. Plague, crack. However, the 50 walls couldn't withstand the cruel dragon's breath. The first one broke, then another, and instantly the third wall had collapsed. Not only were the walls huge, but so was Barca. Barca was slightly smaller than that, but was big enough to terrify others. It isn't as great as Arukasha, the demon dragon the Dragon Lord tamed. If there was hope, it was the fact that Myung hasn't faced a stronger dragon than it. The demon dragon Arukasha. It was the owner of the active volcano that poured darkness, which was a restricted area within the demon god's territory. It turned down any living being from approaching and used liches to manage the death's territory. So many guilds sent out large personnel to conquer the active volcano that poured darkness, but they all failed. Afterwards, for revenge, Arukasha led an army of the dead and invaded the humans' territory. That was how Arukasha destroyed more than 20 huge guilds and clans. It was the event that led to the restructure of all the organization's rank. It was a monster easily in between the 5th level top rank and the transcendental. Could only be controlled when 7 out of 10 top humans came forth. However, it couldn't be killed. Arukasha ran far away, and subsequently, no one knew how the Dragon Lord found and tamed it. Only Myung, who took a peek at the Dragon Lord's status viewer, knew roughly of what happened. Either way, compared to Arukasha the Dark Dragon Barca, The difference was like an adult compared to a child. Even then, it was true that it was terribly strong, but if it was weaker than a Rukasha, it was definitely doable. Muyang could be certain since he personally faced a Rukasha. 3 years. The time I observed the Dragon Lord and Demon Dragon Arukasha. From all the assassinations Muyang had completed, killing the two was the most difficult task. He knew of the Dragon Lord and Demon Dragon Arukasha's every behavior and even the smallest habits. He couldn't be certain if it could be applied to other dragons, but he thought it was worth a try. The dragon's breath can't last for a long time. Continue to shoot cannons in its mouth. Prick. In a blink of an eye, about 15 magical barriers cracked and broke off. There were 35 left. Before they all disappeared, he needed to place a few hits. We will die. We will all die. A dwarf who climbed up the castle wall shivered his body. The dwarf's number was approximately 24,000. Even if Muyang trained them, it wouldn't have the same effect on everyone. There were going to be dwarves like him who didn't overcome their fear for the dragon. As if he made a frantic last-ditch effort, he swayed the waters. Let's run away, please. Logically, how can dwarves win against a dragon? No matter how much we try, our opponent is a dragon. Why do you think Bardas didn't fight at all this time? It all became strange after that Dakibi appeared. Dragons and dwarves are different from birth. Muyang stabbed a sword into his mouth. Gulk. The moment the fallen dwarf was about to scream, Muyang quietly jumped up the castle wall. Slash. And with the sword that was still stuck in the dwarf's mouth, he sliced off his head. Soon numerous specters went into his body through the open neck. Boom. It popped. The flesh pieces from the dead body scattered and spread all around them. Beside it, Muyang's image was as grotesque as ever. I can't have him reduce the fighting spirit. During a battle, he needed to kill his allies who lowered their fighting spirit. No matter what the reason was. All the dwarves who looked at Muyang were shivering. Getting killed by the dragon is going to be less painful than to be killed by me. And it would be more honorable to die by fighting than to die while running away. It's your only chance to end this ill-fated relationship with the dragon. Are you going to run away this time as well? Muyang spoke quietly but with strength. Are you planning to live the rest of your lives as slaves? Always remain as cowards, fugitives. Fight. Battle. They are disregarding dwarves. They are mocking Heimdall's name. Even I, a Dakibi, knows of this truth. But are you trying to turn your back on a chance that only came after a few hundred years? Damn it. Bring more arrows. How long before you bring me the large crossbow? Hurry and drag it here. There, as if you shove it, move the cannon. Shove a cannon in its mouth. Dwarves were fired up. Castle war. Like the name itself. If they were to lose now, there was no other chance. All the dwarves knew of this truth. It wasn't going to be solved even if they run away. They needed to win. That was the only way they could live. Although they were vexed, Muyang's words were all true. Here in the underworld, the dwarves' standing was weak. All the other species thought of dwarves as slaves or fugitives. If they didn't get rid of their bad habit, their future was dark. The oil is poured. Dwarves were burning up fiercely. If these flames would eliminate them or burn up even their opponent, he needed to wait and see how it goes. Taken led the mutants and moved. Taken, who was a death knight and an evil spirit predator, could place specters in mutants to strengthen them. Since flame mutants were made by combining fire tars and avengers, they were enough to attack the enemies from behind. Kala, before he pops out, I need to secure my place here. The dragon hunt was also meaningful to Taken. The 3 sovereigns of Azura's path. Taken was one of the 3, but soon enough the one called Kala will show himself. Kala was a sovereign who was competing with Taken. Their relationship was extremely ill and they had the tendency to hate and have a grudge on each other even over little things. If Kala was to hear that Taken had killed a dragon before him, his expression would be nice to look at. Even for the sake of watching that face, he needed to succeed in this dragon hunt. The other sovereign, Muyang, would he be able to awaken even him? Taken thought of Muyang. And then shook his head. Although Muyang's soul was deeper and was more full of mysteries than anyone else, still he was skeptical. He was the best out of all three sovereigns and was sealed in Azura's path for eternity. Due to the wrath of a god. It was on a much different level than himself or Kala. Even if it was Muyang, he wouldn't be able to break his seal. Taken clicked his tongue. After all, they were all useless thoughts. Right now it was time to attack the dark dragon Barca's back. He swung his huge longsword once. Then a powerful wind force sprang forth and sliced a wing of a wyvern in the air. Afterwards, specters appeared on the both sides of Taken and created a form of wings. Let's go. The same form of wings was created for dozens of mutants in Cerberus. They wouldn't last long, but from the beginning he wasn't planning to fight them for a long time. With Cerberus releasing flames and lightning, the fight had started. The walls the dwarves made was stronger than it seemed. It was also something that hurt Barca's pride. However, it couldn't endlessly maintain its dragon's breath. Kwawewa. Eventually, Barca roared after it stopped its dragon's breath. However, it didn't seem like it gave up. With its claws, Barca grabbed a wyvern flying near it. Crackle. Crack. Then it dumped it in its mouth and swallowed it whole. Depending on the type, dragons had their special characteristic. If the demon dragon could handle the strength of darkness, the dark dragon Barca could absorb health. And Barca's absorb was superior than other dark dragons. Crackle. Crack. After swallowing numerous thunder bats, dark lightning raged around Barca. So, Barca was able to copy the ability of what it swallowed for a short period. Even more, its destructive power was proportional to Barca's strength. It was a variable even Muyang couldn't think of. It was Barca's authority that not even dwarves were well aware of. Once again, Barca accumulated for its breath. And with the strength of thunder and lightning, it poured its breath straight towards the wall. Muyang scrunched his eyebrows. Out of 50 magical barriers, 30 of them were instantly destroyed. Just after one shot, it happened as Barca used the strength of thunder and lightning with his dragon's breath. It was lunch. Muyang noticed Barca's change at once. And why he came with numerous of monsters. Those monsters were all a lunch for Barca. It was obvious that it purposely brought them in order to exhibit the characteristic of a dark dragon. He never thought it could even copy the ability of the opponent it absorbed, but it wasn't an all-around skill. It can't absorb two abilities at once and reproduce them. Wyverns were oddly a monster with earth attributes rather than the wind. However, Barca only exhibited lightning attributes. It meant that it could only copy one type of ability at a time. Without copying, it couldn't easily destroy the magical barriers with his breath. What should he do? Muyang rubbed his chin. Zap. Zap. Yow, it hurts. Hing. Why is it suddenly acting like this? At that moment, Wuhi shivered her whole body and let out her dissatisfaction. It was just that the metals that Wuhi were wearing were creating an odd reaction. He wasn't sure where she got them from, but static was continuously arising from the metals. After looking at the scene, Muyang quickly turned his head. Bring me iron pillars now. And ordered the dwarves nearby. Dwarves moved orderly and brought out numerous steel pillars that were approximately 2 m tall. Muyang, who saw them, gave out his next order. Distribute and place the pillars on top of the castle walls. You must place them widely apart from one another. Is there a reason why you place these there? I have no time to explain. Hurry. Muyang was after lightning rods. Lightning and thunder could only react to metal conductors, and the lightning rods that were placed in different areas would divide the strength of the lightning and thunder. Dwarves also knew of its principle, but because they were so lost in this battle they just weren't able to realize it. After a while, the lightning rods were placed in different areas of the castle walls and the strength of the lightning and thunder subsided. The attack has weakened. The pillars are working. The spirit of the dwarves rose once more. Then, as if the dark dragon also realized something odd, it stopped its breath for a moment. It is probably planning to eat up other monsters. For now they were done defending against thunder and lightning attributes. However, there was still earth attributes which the wyverns had and the wind attributes from wind riders. However, both attributes were weak against one attribute. Earth and wind attributes are all weak against dark attributes. That was the interrelations between attributes. And darkness was a field Muyang was most confident with. It will be a muddy fight. Before all the magical barriers got destroyed, he was planning to reduce Barca's power to the best he could. And to do this, he was prepared to even enter the mud. Swoosh. He took out his sword. Now it was time for Muyang to take an active part. The magic that the dragons used was purer than anything else. That was why there was quite a firm difference in terms of superiority among their attributes. Muyang went up the castle walls and made thousands of specters surround him. As he was surrounded by a black fog, Muyang's whole body was completely black. If my magic resistance didn't pass 200 with the wicked god's sword, I wouldn't even try, but right now when it's above 200 he could at least deal with it for a bit. Muyang declared the Absolute's territory. The surrounding pressure of magic became disorganized, and with Muyang in the middle, all the attacks were weakened. After Muyang looked straight at Barca, he continued to build specters. Thicker, stronger. A skill was created. Was it because he has been using the specters for quite a while? Or was it because he acted in a certain way? Either way, it was rare for a skill to be created like this. On top of that, it was instantly decided as a C rank when it was created. The effect of 5 Qi. Muyang nodded his head. Purity. Through 5 Qi, Muyang's basic skills had all been raised to C rank in the past. Above all, it would take an average of 3 years for a normal person to learn a skill. A person needed to indefinitely repeat and research in order to earn a skill regarding it. Compared to this, Muyang was much better off. Although he didn't intend for this to happen, he accepted it as if it was an obvious thing. Soon, a fog made up of specters built a strong wall and blocked his front. Wow, what's that? I'm getting goosebumps. From the sooty wall, different kinds of faces seemed like they were going to pop out with their mouths open. Its appearance was completely eerie. Dwarven bodies shivered instantly when they looked at it. Certainly, it was a skill that was eye-catching. Give me Bardas. Then I will let you live. Suddenly, Muyang could hear a voice in his head. Barca. Muyang immediately knew that the voice inside his head was Barca. Since there weren't many magical barriers left, it probably became possible for it to deliver his message. You have no chance of winning. Just open the gates and accept me. With Bardas's life you could all live. Don't be fooled by its skillful words. Muyang yelled right away. Barca's message echoed in the hearts of the people. It was because the presence of a dragon was passed on directly. Dragon's words. The words a dragon spoke had weight. A forceful order was planted in people's mind. But that didn't mean that everything it said was true. Even if they handed Bardas to Barca, it wouldn't save the rest of the dwarves. If it did let them live, he would use them as slaves right up to their deaths. Don't listen to the words of the dragon. Muyang spoke again to the dwarves who were making a noise. Why would Barca negotiate now? It's because it's beyond his power. It's because the dwarves' resistance was greater than it imagined. So it has no choice but to toss a bait. Have you ever seen a dragon who truly negotiated? We are almost there. Barca was taken back. Muyang could see it. As he said, if it did have enough strength, it wouldn't even try to negotiate like this. It would have destroyed them with no questions like it did in the beginning. However, it changed its route. To make the dwarves open their gates, it even mixed dragon's words in order to send its message. It was bluffing. For Barca, it was something that really hurt its pride. However, since that didn't even work, it was too clear in Muyang's eyes what it was going to do next. You are so foolish. You are bringing death upon yourselves. Koa. Barca opened its mouth wide. It gathered its strength to use, and the earth and the sky started to shake. Muyang raised his wall of specters higher. A single round match. He just needed to block it just this once. Even if it was possible to absorb, there was a limit. It wasn't infinite. It was the same for the demon dragon Arukisha. Its dark demon power was used up to a certain point and it could only run away. Swadash. Smack. Then a long sword suddenly flew in from somewhere. And it pierced through the flesh near Barca's neck and became stuck. One who could damage the skin of a dragon. There weren't many who could succeed by throwing their weapon. Muyang looked at Taken, who triumphantly flapped its black wings like a devil from afar. As if he had helped him. It did help. Muyang silently replied and focused all his strength. Soon the dragon's breath reached the magical barrier and the wall of specters. Rumble. Crack. Crackle. All the magical barriers were broken. The wall of specters shook wildly. Muyang clenched his teeth. His teeth broke and his nails cracked away. Both his hands and shoulders he used to raise the wall of specters were flushed red. However, it was more endurable than he had thought. Taken reduced Barca's focus, and due to it, Barca's explosive power was weakened. Barca thought that it was hard to break through the wall of specters and stopped his dragon's breath. Kwawa. At the same time it cried. It exploded as nothing was happening as it planned. I will kill you all. Muyang smiled. He directly stopped Barca's attack. No matter the process, this truth was enough. I can't believe it. I'm not seeing things right. He stopped a dragon's breath alone? There were some exaggerations, but Muyang didn't try to clarify. Instead he screamed loud like an explosion. Raise your weapons. Its strength is gone. The magical barriers were all broken. If they were to just stand there, it would be the same as being defeated. Even if it did use up its strength, a dragon was a dragon. However, Muyang personally showed that they could win, and from there the dwarves felt hope. Plague. They all held a weapon and a shield. Yes. We have Muyang. We can do it. We can really do it. It was a moment where Muyang's presence suddenly rose. They were prepared to run out with their hardened faces. Then Muyang continued to speak. It's the start of the counterattack. Borbdash. The horn was blown. A true castle war had started. Almost 10,000 casualties. The number of enemies had also decreased to about a half. And Muyang was ruling the war. He took out all his cards to stop Barca. Flame mutants, Black Sun Warrior, Heidegger, Taken and Cerberus. And even the Hell Horse. Your worst natural enemies are undead. The dark dragon Barca's best ability was absorption. It absorbed the life of others and recovered its stamina and used their abilities as its own. However, undead were already dead beings. How could Barca absorb life from opponents that didn't have 1 ounce of life? Barca's biggest natural enemies were undead and Muyang. Kaya. Using its huge wings, Barca smacked its surrounding. Whenever it did, all kinds of specters, evil spirits, and undead clung to it to restrict its movement. As Barca felt desperate, it tried swallowing undead, but it was no use. It slowly broke away from the battleground and was now fighting Muyang alone. In other words, it meant that there were no living creatures around it to swallow. A dark dragon's basic stamina wasn't high. Dragons were a top-rank species, and when they have a cheat skill like absorb, they don't really need to improve their basic stats. Since dark dragons were able to exhibit stronger power than their opponent had by absorbing. And that arrogance currently held Barca back. Paiyawang. Barca flapped its wing greatly. It realized that it didn't have a chance like this. However, Muyang wasn't well off either. Already few hundreds of undead were destroyed. Go. When Muyang ordered, the Black Sun Warrior started to move. Now all the undead climbed up Barca's back. It was the same for Muyang. I need to stall for time. Up to now it went as he planned. The problem was that he needed to withstand 30 more seconds. It was planned for the Demon Dragon lethal cannon to be shot here. That was why he needed to make sure Barca didn't leave this area and avoid the Demon Dragon lethal cannon when it was launched. Kreoawayawang. Barca shot his last breath everywhere. Whenever it flocked its wings, dozens of undead made it fall closer to the ground, and everything that was touched by the breath got destroyed. Muyang clenched his teeth and used his sword. I need to endure it. He wagered everything in this one shot. If he failed, there was nothing left. The rest will lose their fighting power and will wait for Barca's attack while they suck on their thumbs. Dragons were a species with a strong thirst for revenge. It would never let Muyang go. Rumble. Every time the hell horse kicked from the side, black lightning would strike down. Although Barca opened its maw to eat the hell horse, it was impossible since its movements were constricted. The hell horse was doing its job well. It was definitely worth using his second request. 25 seconds, 26 seconds, 27 seconds. Now. Muyang, who had finished counting exactly 30 seconds, kicked off Barca's back as he saw a light approaching from afar. Even the undead jumped down as soon as they received Muyang's message. However, not all were able to jump down. Around half of the undead accompanied Barca as they were hit by the exploding light beam. Shwa! The strong light instantly engulfed the territory whole. Once the light had swept through, a hole was pierced in the sky and destroyed everything in its path. Even the great dark dragon Barca was unable to endure that light. Nothing remained in the places the light had swept past. The dragon's leather, its bones, and even the countless undead, all disappeared as if they had evaporated. All that remained was a peaceful silence. Muyang, who had dropped on the ground, gazed at his left hand. It burned off. His arm had vanished precisely up to his left elbow. Only a thick, burnt smell remained. It seemed he wasn't able to completely get out of the demon dragon lethal cannon's area of attack. Seeing as he didn't feel any pain, it seemed as though even his nerves had been damaged. Muyang frowned. But the next moment something fell in front of his eyes. Thump, thump. The falling object beat violently as it revealed its life force. Muyang, who saw this, couldn't help but shiver. As someone who had awakened their purity, Muyang could instantly tell that the object in front of him possessed a very noble, pure power. Only this remained after everything of the dragon had been destroyed. The dragon's heart. It was precisely the heart of the dragon. Muyang's heart beat furiously as well. It was an object that was said to be impossible to obtain. This was said to be second to that of the phoenix's heart, perhaps possessing an even greater power. A dragon would personally destroy its heart before it died. It was because they possessed a personality that extremely despised getting used by others and because they knew the value of their hearts better than anyone else. However, Barca didn't have any time to prepare. The moment it noticed the light, it had been too late. If Muyang had been a little late, his entire body would have been destroyed. He was lucky to have only lost his left hand. However, it seemed even the demon dragon lethal cannon was unable to extinguish this noble and pure power. Ha! Muyang smirked. They say if you lose something you will gain something else. There were many stories of heroes who became strong by obtaining a dragon's heart. What could make a normal person possess the power of 100 men was precisely a dragon's heart. Because of this, it was an object everyone hungered after, and wars frequently broke out for a single heart. This was what was in front of Muyang. Muyang's eyes that gazed at the dragon's heart glittered brilliantly. Although Muyang said it was a heart, it was more close to a gem. Fitting its name as Dark Dragon, it was a black hexagonal-shaped treasure. The size was at most 1 span wide. However, it couldn't be ignored. It shined like the Star of David, and although its main body had died, it was a source of life that continued to pump. An infinite amount of magical power was stored inside. Dragon's heart wasn't also called the Gem of the Sage for no reason. The ones who have the dragon's heart, 9 out of 10 died. It was accepted as a fact of life. Dragon's heart was really rare, but when it rarely did appear, the owner always changed. Even if they did swallow it themselves, they wouldn't win out against the strength of the heart and their body would burst. It was truly something that they weren't willing to keep or give up. Muyang slowly reached his hand out and held the heart. Ba-dum, ba-dum. He couldn't tell if it was the sound of his heart or the sound of the dragon's heart. Muyang was captivated by its strange light. However, his mind wasn't overwhelmed. As his mind enhanced, Muyang's eyes became colder. Is that the dragon's heart? Taken approached him. Thankfully, he and Cerberus seemed to have escaped the danger of the demon dragon lethal cannon. However, Taken was different from Muyang. He was drawn to the appeal of the dragon's heart. Taken looked at the treasure Muyang was holding with eyes that were overflowing with greed. Really, it really is beautiful. It seems like it's worth more than any treasure on Azura's path. It's like an artwork made by a god. Taken started to move as he was drawn to the heart. For this reason, 9 out of 10 people die after they receive the dragon's heart. The magical power that came out of the heart had charmed everyone around it. It was truly a poisonous flower itself. Swoosh. Muyang put the heart away and took out Anguish. Even though his left arm was gone, he was still able to perform 80% of his abilities. Assassins had to know how to deal with all types of situations and had to be prepared even with so many restrictions. His fighting abilities didn't drastically decrease just because he lost an arm. Stop. Let me just look at it. I just want to see it closer. I told you to stop. Swoosh. In time, Muyang's sword had touched Taken's soul. Through soul exploitation effect, Muyang was able to see the soul of the undead he created. Taken moved his gaze to Muyang, as if he was asking the question if Muyang was going to really slice his soul. If Muyang could really do well without his help. Within a short amount of time, Taken really did give Muyang a lot of help. Even looking further, there will be countless times where his strength would be needed. However, Taken soon realized that his thoughts were a mistake. Muyang's hand moved a little closer. Muyang's eyes didn't flicker. He wasn't one to hesitate about slicing someone. He was totally heartless and cold. Taken's body shivered as he looked at Muyang's eyes. Azura. Brr. How is it that I see his image overlap with him? The king of every kind of Dakibi. How was it that the appearance of the god who locked him up in Azura's path was projected? Cruel, violent, and completely arrogant, but a ruler with undeniable strength. How could he? Takan stopped his footsteps. His affection towards the dragon's heart disappeared. For a moment I was blinded. Finally, Taken regained control of himself. His voice had a strong hint of regret. Although there was no expression, Muyang thought Taken's face was quite wrinkled up. For someone who is called a sovereign to lose his control over just a treasure, it seemed to have hurt his pride. Taken asked as he took a step back. That treasure makes everything go crazy. How are you going to manage it? Swoosh. Muyang sheathed back Anguish. I'm going to swallow it. Your body will not be able to cope with the magical power of the treasure. You should know better yourself. He knew. But he was willing to still try. If he was to achieve second metamorphosis, it was possible that his body will regenerate. It might be safer to create an equipment with the dragon's heart to substitute for his left arm, but that wasn't enough. Muyang had a lot of greed. If I am to eat the dragon's heart, I will lose or gain it all. One of the two. Through the dragon's heart, he was going to attempt to regenerate his body. Also, it was told that if someone was successful in accepting a dragon's heart, there was a low chance of achieving a skill related to a dragon's ability. Muyang moved without speaking. The war has not ended yet. Sis. What do you think? Are you talking about the gem of the sage he earned? If he was to swallow it, he wouldn't survive. It is a future that is already decided. It's not like he is our only candidate. It's poison to collect all strengths in one direction. The student Merlin just took in. I like him. Merlin? The magician in the blue temple. However, that guy is half evil. We can't trust him. How about the girl who is the successor of Light? She also did have quite the potential. If we help her to learn the instructions on Light, she is easily able to become a saint. As I recall, didn't she have connections with the Death Lord's messenger? Stop. People, my messenger did not die yet. And as a reward, we could give him something that could neutralize the dragon's heart. Death Lord, are you saying we should give him the potion of God? It is prohibited to give such a favor. Even with my name on the line? I am the incarnate of death, Arte. Stop. It is against the law to mention your true name. If your mind is that determined, then release the restriction, Death Lord. If I remember correctly, we each had authority to change matters of the other world. Death Lord, I believe you still have one chance left? Spirit Sovereign, you bastard. It doesn't seem like you are willing to release the restriction. Now let's discuss what reward we are going to give him. Since he did have a crucial role in killing the dragon and winning the castle war, I'm thinking of giving him the Spirit Baron. What do you guys think? Spirit Baron. Are you talking about that taboo spirit? It's more than enough as a reward. Then I will understand that everyone besides Death Lord accepts. Wait. Kingslayer, what is it? That restriction, I will release it. You will. Is it that surprising? You have never released the restriction before. Although others used it at least once. I just never had a reason to use it. And Muyang didn't know how to use my strength properly. I will use this opportunity to show him. What does he have that makes you, Kingslayer, obsess about? Although the human called Muyang is great, he is still just a human. Isn't he not that big of a deal for you, the noblest knight, to obsess about? He told me. He will not break. I just thought it was a waste for him to die now. Also, there is something I need to check in person. All the dwarves cried out loud. That they had won. They had ended the few hundreds of years of vice. The death of Dark Dragon Barca would not end as just a death of one dragon. Other dragons will know of this truth, and dwarves would no longer need to be fugitives. Dragon Slayer. Dragon Slayer dash. However, someone else was a critical role in their victory. Dwarves all gathered around Muyang. Muyang raised Anguish up high. At the same time, this was also expected since it wasn't the first time Muyang had hunted the dragon. Out of the top 10 humans, about half of them had experience in hunting dragons. The achievement effect Muyang earned right now was the same for them. It was different how they hunted dragons after they became strong, but Muyang was successful when all his abilities were quite lacking. Although it was due to the demon dragon lethal cannon, Muyang still took part in all of the process. Killing many birds with one stone. He had hunted a dragon and had gained both the Kingslayer's effect and the achievement effect at once. There was something different. Kingslayer raised his pure stats while the achievement effect raised his supporting stats. But right now it wasn't important. What Muyang was waiting for was their evaluation. The Masters of Darkness made up of 11 individuals. The reward he received depending on their evaluation could not be ignored. On one hand, greaves were created. It seemed like the greaves matched his breastplate as if they were naturally a pair. As Muyang concentrated on the equipment, information regarding it appeared. Name, Greaves of Destruction Baron. Rank, A+++. Classification, Equipable Type. Endurance, 100,000. Effect, Greaves possessed by a Spirit Baron. Agility +20. Stamina +20. Intelligence +30. The Spirit Baron can be summoned. The taboo Spirit Baron attacks without separating enemies from allies. It is highly likely that it will attack the user first. All of the Spirit Baron's stats are determined by doubling of the user's intelligence, at most 500. Stats were prominent, but the last effect was a double-edged sword. Spirit Baron. It was a name he hadn't heard of, but if it was affected by his intelligence, it seems like it was considered as a type of skill. I understand why destruction is part of its name. Still, it said that there was a high chance it would attack the user. If he had the confidence of fleeing after summoning it, it seemed like it could surely be used as a bomb. Muyang removed the knee guard of fresh blood and wore his greaves. Dwarves were instantly confused, but Muyang didn't care. Then he turned on his status viewer. He wanted to check his final completed stats. Achievement effect dash. Star of Purity, S. All stats +20 waking phase of the Absolute. Dragon Hunter, A++. All stats +20. Out of the Dragon's Influence. A+, Strength +10. Ruler of Dabies. Gremmary's Anguish, A. +3 to all abilities. Azura's vassal, A. The strength to deal with spirits and devil's power. Spirit ability increased by 10. Soulmate B+. From now on, if you commune with an undead, the undead stats will slightly increase permanently. Descendant of Murlocs B+. Increased growth of Murlocs. Fairy's Blessing B. Allows fairies to feel familiar with the user. Class effect dash. Death Lord Lord class Ruler of Death. Kingslayer Lord class Slayer of Kings. Strength 221, 115 plus 106. Agility 196, 109 plus 87. Stamina 181, 94 plus 87. Intelligence 157, 90 plus 67. Wisdom 157, 90 plus 67. Fighting Aura 164, 66 plus 98. Magic Resistance 212, 54 plus 158. Spirit Ability 111, 53 plus 58. Special note: Fighting Aura has been awakened. Completed the first metamorphosis. You have accomplished 3 flowers condensing onto the head and 5 chi and have realized purity. Equipped and invoked equipment. Anguish, Strength plus 14, Ogre's Cruelty. Lunatic Sovereign's Set. All stats plus 15, Stamina plus 10. Immortal King's Breastplate, Strength plus 15, Fighting Aura plus 30, Stamina plus 50, Magic Resistance plus 80. Set equipment. Wicked Belt, Intelligence and Wisdom plus 4. All undead are strengthened by 5%. Hermes's Boots. Agility plus 15, 3 seconds of acceleration. Skull Accessory, Strength plus 19, Agility plus 4. Greaves of Destruction, Baron. Agility and Stamina plus 20, Intelligence plus 30, Summon Baron. Wicked God's Sword, Fighting Aura plus 20, Cry of Battle. Contempt for the Weak. Magic Resistance plus 30, Extortion of Energy. Set equipment. Starlight, Star of the Absolute. All abilities plus 10, Star Looter, Absolute's Territory. As the King Slayer and Dragon Hunter effects overlapped, he was able to supplement for the most chronic problem of his intelligence and wisdom. For an explorer who hasn't been here for even a year, it was a condition no one would believe. No matter how fast, it would take about 5 years. No, something that needs at least 10 years. Muyang completed this in less than a year. Still lacking. However, Muyang was thirsty. It was still far for him to handle everything alone. Muyang's goal wasn't to be in the top 10 humans. He wanted to be the absolute who could win against demon kings and demon gods alone. For him to accomplish this, he needed to go faster. I will use the little wish to swallow the dragon's heart. And Muyang held the way to take a leap forward. The dragon's heart. Through it, he was going to get stronger. The world would change. And in it there was a woman. No, there had to be one. It was as usual. Little wish. The tool that would let out a fake image of an angel to grant a small wish. However, the one that appeared wasn't a fake angel or a blue background. Who are you? There was no trace of a woman with wings, but instead, there was a black shadow of a person. As if it was a shadow, only the outline was visible. As a silhouette of a man holding a sword was looking towards Muyang, he couldn't help but ask. However, the man did not reply. Instead, he held his greatsword. With one hand, he easily swung the greatsword and suddenly started to attack. Clang, clang, rumble. Whenever the man leaped, the ground shook. Everything around was dark, but Muyang could feel it. Muyang also took out Anguish. However, it was beyond his capability to block the man's attack with one hand. Are you thinking that you aren't able to block my attack because you have one hand? As if the black shadow could read Muyang's mind, he spoke. The voice had a lot of noise clustered, but still, it wasn't to the point he couldn't understand. Swak. Then the man sliced off his own left arm. As if he was willing to face him with the same condition. And then when the battle continued, Muyang couldn't help but feel a shudder. It's sophisticated. It was a continuation of sophisticated attacks without a single error. The man loosened his strength and was facing Muyang purely by his swordsmanship. But Muyang was still unable to strike the man. It was due to the difference of their basic skills. There is a difference in skill itself? It was funny. Even if he worked as an assassin for over 40 years, Muyang's knowledge in basic swordsmanship was extraordinary. By watching, he acquainted numerous swordsmanship of strong men and made them his own. The skills Muyang had come to perfect after improving them himself. But the man in front of him was on another level. It made it seem like his swordsmanship was poor. The man's blow had all kinds of exquisite principles. He just knew that there were. It was a phenomenon that occurred after he was awakened by purity. But there was no way of knowing what that exquisite principle were. You don't even fully understand what you have. The man's greatsword pierced through Muyang's side. Like a slow motion, it was a move that was absolutely leisurely. He couldn't believe it. With his eyes wide open, Muyang looked at his side that was pierced. It was clearly slow. So slow that he could yawn. But suddenly it pierced through his body. Was this really something that was possible? It was a sword that was endlessly fast and continued slowly. He thought he was obviously going to block the man's attack but couldn't. He turned his head and looked at the black shadow. With an expression as if he was about to laugh, the black shadow spoke. Even a slow sword could have few thousands of different alternations. You could also perform this swordsmanship. Muyang knitted his brows. That slow sword. No matter how many times he looked at it, he couldn't understand it. But the man said he was able to perform the same. However, Muyang never pursued slow movements. Only fast. He just mastered how to be elaborate and fast. Since there was nothing else needed besides fast in an assassination. Cough. Muyang coughed up blood. Because you believe you are perfect, your abilities are stagnant. Your physical might be stronger, but your foundation is terrible. No one was able to say that Muyang's skills were terrible. If anything, wasn't Muyang's pure skills better than everyone else? That's why he believed that he just needed to regain his previous fighting power. He believed that the only way he could get stronger was to quickly raise his stats. Who are you? Muyang asked again. However, the answer he heard was different from what he expected. Try to figure it out with a sword. Afterwards, the man raised his greatsword. And the sword flew towards him. It was totally relaxed, but Muyang wasn't able to do a thing. In all his life he had never seen a sword like this. Wang Chunlin was known as a killing machine, and even the numerous martial masters who learned martial arts for generations were no better than the man in front of him. It was like the difference between a child and an adult. He was on a different level. Felt like the sky fell down. You are dead. The man spoke as Muyang's neck was sliced off. With that as an end, Muyang's consciousness became muddy. Muyang quickly lifted his upper body. Lavishing inner castle. Muyang was completely wet on top of a bed. I clearly remember using the little wish. However, he wasn't able to pray for a wish. He was trying to strengthen his physical for a moment in order to swallow the dragon's heart. But because of the sudden appearance of a black shadow, it didn't happen. Who was he? The answer he could hear until the end. He said to identify him with only a sword. However, Muyang was unable to identify him. It was because there was a clear difference in their skills. Clench. Muyang clenched his teeth tight. If the difference was simply their fighting power, he wouldn't feel this much sense of futility. However, the man fought Muyang with the same stats. Strength, stamina, agility, etc. They were all the same. As Muyang faced him, he was able to understand. Would there be a greater humiliation than this? He was confident in his basic skills, but it was demolished without mercy. As if he was mocked, it just swept him and passed by. Conceit. Did I conceit? However, it wasn't rage that felt after the end of humiliation and futility. It was self-reflection. The man also said this. That he was stagnant because he believed he was perfect himself. His words might not be wrong. Didn't he continuously plan to develop himself with external help? It was enough to call it conceit. Swoosh. Muyang held anguish. and slowly swirled it. A slow sword. In it, it has a few thousands of different alternations. He never thought a sword that he had never heard of or seen before could exist. It was a fresh shock and he wanted to approach it. That wasn't the end. Whenever Muyang fell asleep, the fight with him continued. Only after a few days had passed did Bartas come to see him. However, Bartas could only tilt his head after looking at Muyang's face. "Is your body okay? For some reason you don't look so good." Although there were no visible injuries, his dark circles were quite deep. "You're later than I thought." "I'm sorry. I'm late because I had something to think about. And, thank you. Thanks to you, we were able to win the castle war." It seemed like there was a bit of goodwill towards Muyang. First, his gaze and his way of speaking had changed. He was able to feel a sense of genuineness from the way Bartas showed his gratefulness. "Speaking of which, do you want anything? If it's something I can do, I am willing to do it. Although the breastplate is already made, but that isn't enough." "Not enough." God hand Bartas. The equipment he created were worth 1,000 gold. He had a lot of pride on the work he created. That was why he didn't make equipment for the most request. However, he said that it wasn't enough. Muyang started to talk after he thought for a moment. "Can I borrow 500 dwarves? Dwarves. I'm a lord who rules over a territory. I live with few thousands of duckibis and thousands of different species. However, their foundation is lacking. I need the work of dwarves." He really wanted them to move their base, but Rome wasn't built in a day. Bartas was the lord of an alliance. Just as there can't be two kings in one mountain, it was best to lend the dwarves for now. If it is for that reason, there is no reason for me to decline. "I will lend you 1,000. Bartas quietly murmured to himself that it was a good thing that they got rid of the dark dragon Barca before the devil's long night started. During that time, most monsters refrained their activities, but individuals like dragons were still active. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me. Rather, didn't think you were a lord. That was why it didn't seem out of the ordinary for you to manage dwarves." "It's nothing. For you it might be nothing, but for me, for us, it's a great thing. If we didn't stand up then, we would still not be free from being fugitives." Bartas shook his head and cleared his throat as he held out something to Muyang. "Ahem, please accept this." It was a ring with a unique seal. A dragon was drawn in, but it was so detailed that it looked alive and as if it was about to move. "This is. It's a seal that you are a friend of the dwarves. Since I have guaranteed it, no dwarf will be able to disregard you." It seemed like he was late because he was busy making this. Muyang grinned and accepted the ring. Achievement effect, Dwarf's sworn friend, has been added. Not just a friend but a sworn friend. It meant that Muyang's worth rose quite a lot during this time. "Then, are you going to leave right away?" "No, there is an item I need to find first." "An item you need to find?" "I will be back within 90 days. It would be nice if you could supply your strength then." "I understand. And don't forget. We dwarves are your friend." Muyang nodded his head. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. If he was to enhance his relationship with the dwarves, it would become a great help in the future. Things ended faster than I thought. There was over 150 days before the devil's long night started. He couldn't just waste the time he has left. Finally, if it's to the north side, there was something he needed to find. Orus's throne. Lunatic Sovereign's ring, Hamel's rune ring, and Orus's throne ring. There were all items that were needed in order to free Diabolos. And among them, Orus's throne ring was at the north side. For him to return, it would take time, so it would be right for him to find it while he was here. It is also a suitable place to raise basic skills. Muyang clenched his fist. He felt he first needed to raise his basic skills before eating the dragon's heart. "Ah, and take this. Arm. I made something to replace your left arm." Ahem, there was something useful in the storage room. The item Bartas took out was a left arm. To be exact, it replaced from his elbow of the arm, but it was very exquisite. No, in some ways it seemed better than the real arm. There was a clear difference in the role of tendons and bones. As he touched it for a moment, he could also feel the pulse that moved. The completely fierce magical powers felt like it touched his skin. It didn't make sense that something like this would roll around in the storage. It definitely was something Bardas used all his strength to make. Bardas probably felt bad about the left arm that flew away when he was fighting the dark dragon Barca. Dwarves are deeply affectionate once you befriend them. Dwarves were famous for repaying their debts to their enemies and their friends. It was hard to befriend them at first, but once you befriended them, they were famous for helping you most of the time. It seemed like Bardas's heart was opened out to him. He was shy to say that he created it, so he sort of made it up. I can feel a strength out of the ordinary. I have added the tendons of a phoenix and wyvern king's heart. To know how well it fits your body, you need to wear it. But the biggest output can even destroy a small mountain. Myung was able to feel the pride in his voice. It seemed like he created the breastplate with the heart of the phoenix and used the tendons left to make the left arm. On top of that, a wyvern king's heart. He could only be surprised about this part. It was an extremely rare mutant-type monster that could also be called the Emperor of the Sky. Although it wasn't as good as a dragon, it didn't change the fact that it was a monster out of the monsters. It was huge and also was able to release the breath. When he categorized it in a rank, it was more than enough to be in the top rank. It would have been hard to even find it, but Bardas generously used this precious material. On top of that, since Bardas's skills were added, there was nothing more to say. It probably wasn't a lie that it could even destroy a mountain. Then Bardas gave Myung a look, as if he was encouraging Myung to try it on. To wear it for a while, it's perfect. To wear it while preparations were completed, it was perfect. And Myung was worried. The black shadow that popped out as he used the little wish. He continued to talk. To strengthen his basic skills. To not think so hastily. Like a teacher, he was trying to teach Myung. And he was surely qualified. He was more superior than any human Myung had faced up until now. When he realized up to that point, Myung couldn't help but laugh in vain. The one I need to face isn't a human. It was true. It was indeed true. How did humanity collapse so easily like it did? It was because the strength of the demon kings and demon gods were beyond one's imaginations. Top 10 humans? For them it would be too much to face one demon king. If they desperately tried, then at most two. Even that was a 50/50 chance. Wasn't it obvious that they couldn't even dream of beating a demon god? Just Gremory alone had 26 demon kings in their armies. But Myung thought only as far as the standards of a human. Basic skills. That might be superior to any humans. If he used the standards of a demon king or demon god, then, well, I don't know them well. Myung had faced humans. Just the assassination of humans. It wasn't like he didn't face monsters, but demon gods were truly gods. It was unfit to consider it as a monster. To act on the superiority of one's stats were the limits of humans. They acted because they didn't know. The black shadow was pointing to those mistakes of Myung. The world doesn't revolve around you. He urged himself. Basic skills were harder to master as he gained more strength and become more powerful. It meant that if it wasn't now, he would have to go around a much longer path. Instead, by fighting the black shadow, he realized that not being so hasty was the way to go through a much shorter path. Myung was making a big mistake because he ran without a delay. That the world ran with him, the only one who returned from the future as the center. However, the enemy was powerful, strong, and endless. The dragon's heart. The treasure also called the gem of the sage. Perhaps the black shadow was telling him that it wasn't time yet. To not be too dependent on outer strikes. That only when he himself can fully control it, then would he be able to exhibit his true strength. He continued to express that sort of will. So he was planning to use this left arm until he could fully control it. Myung. As Myung was deep in his thoughts, God Hand Bardas spoke as he was puzzled. But Myung escaped from his thoughts and wore the left arm. It fits perfectly. It's the characteristics of that phoenix. The tendons automatically change to fit the user. There was no need to use the tendons on the breastplate, so I didn't use it. I didn't just leave it out. I know. From the beginning, it was a breastplate that matched Muyang's body. There was no reason for tendons to be included. On the other hand, this hand needed to move quite freely. It had a different use. I'm glad you know it. Now you just need to endure it. It was at that moment. Right. From the arm, tendons sprouted out and wrapped Muyang's left shoulder. And touched each and every nerve and slowly started to assimilate. As if he was burnt by fire, the pain swept over him. He felt like all the heat from his body was all gathered to his left arm. Muyang clenched his teeth. Cold sweat dripped down from his body. Azure Sky King's left arm has recognized the user Muyang. Azure Sky King's breath is now usable. Azure Sky King's left arm strength is fixed at 300. Tendons that popped out like tentacles were rooted through Muyang's whole body. It settled down once the assimilation was completed, but Muyang kept twitching his whole body. After watching him, Bardas was all amazed. I thought the assimilation rate would be around 90%, but by looking at you it seems like you passed 95%. The Azure Sky King's left arm was attached to Muyang's left side as if it was his real arm. Although the veins of the part that connected to his arm were more bulging, he could barely feel the difference. Crack. As he grabbed the side of the desk, it broke as it was. Felt like he was touching the sand. Although he didn't control his strength properly, it was still strong. Then as he looked at Bartas laughed out loud. Even though the outer appearance isn't that greatly different from your arm, the interior is completely different. To withstand the twin head ogres and your muscles, I used Aurum as its backbone. He seemed very proud. Twin head ogres were known as the strongest monster simply by looking at their strength. On top of that, if it was Aurum, it was a mid-legend class, or if he simply calculated, this one arm was basically worth a castle. Even if he was the Lord of the Alliance, it would have been a heartbreaking expense. However, Bardas's expression didn't show any signs of it being a waste. It's too good of an arm. If you think of it as a price for helping God hand Bardas, it is quite cheap. It would take a bit of time for you to get used to it. Muyang nodded his head. Truly, there was a bit of a difference. To control his strength, it seemed like he needed to put a bit of effort. Not bad. Instead, it was a problem that it was too good. Seemed like he could quickly control his powers. He basically added another thing to learn to control. Also, the Azure Sky King's left arm was the work only the God Hand Bardas could create. To earn it for a bargain didn't make any sense. It was obvious that it needed some effort. Strength fixed at 300. Fixed meant that other effects didn't work. Muyang's current strength was 221. It didn't balance. But the ends of Muyang's lips were raised instead. It should be fun. Muyang's competitiveness escalated as there were more tasks he needed to overcome. Asterisk reality clearly influenced his dream world. As he earned the Azure Sky King's left arm, his dream world would have also been projected as it was. And in his dream world, Muyang met him, once again. The Black Shadow. The shadow whose deep eyes were the only thing visible. You earned quite an amusing toy. The man's sword was still slow. Sometimes he approached him like a river, like a lake, or like a vast ocean. But Muyang was still unable to block him. Did you think you could find a way if he used two arms? I just wanted to check the gap more clearly. No matter how strong he was, even when he used the Azure Sky King's breath, he wasn't able to reach the man. Muyang already knew that he couldn't do it. But he realized something as he used two arms. So, did you realize the difference between you and me? A bit. Ho! The man was in awe. What is it? The sword. The sword. You know the sword better than me. It was true. Muyang knew that their understanding itself was different. The man was a sword master, who surpassed the limits. It felt like he even knew the breath of the sword. It was an impossible artistry as a human. To know the breath of the sword and to move as if he was one body with it. However, that wasn't all. Muyang had no idea how that sort of artistry was possible. The man smiled. It is difficult to accept something that is out of their perception. It is an amazing talent for you to know even that. So, I will specially give you some advice. And spoke quietly. You can't hear the sound of a sword? The sound of a sword? A sword did not have any sound. Oh, it wasn't alive. There were specific sounds that a simple lump of metal could produce. However, it didn't seem like he was referring to that sound. I have died 8 times. However, the man didn't reply to Muyang. Instead, Muyang was swept by a huge tidal wave. The man could become a mountain, a sky, and even an ocean. Cow-oo. Muyang let out a cry as he lifted his upper body. It seems like you had another bad dream. Beside him, Taken spoke. Kalmu stayed at the castle to raise his skills. So only Muyang and Taken rode on Cerberus and were headed to the deeper parts of the north. Taken, have you heard the sound of a sword? If it's a sword possessed by evil spirits, I have heard them often. No, it's not those. The sound of a sword itself. Ting dash. Taken smacked the side of a sword. You mean this sound? Muyang shook his head. The evil spirit predator. It seemed like even Taken, one of the 3 sovereigns of Azura's path, also didn't know. It meant that the black shadow was that much more extraordinary. Muyang rubbed his chin and pondered before he thought of a possibility. The sound of a sword. The sword master skill had similar words. As he remembered the skill, information regarding it appeared. Skill title, Swordmaster The. Description, the one who walks the path of a sword. A unique power only given to the Kingslayer who has surpassed everything, honing his sword skills. Asterisk understanding of sword drastically increased. Asterisk you can find out about a sword's hidden story. Asterisk it pulls out the pure performance of a sword. His understanding itself had rose, but the hidden story. He had never once checked the story. Of course, he didn't know what the part, it pulls out the pure performance, meant either. Muyang raised anguish. He held it still, placed it near his ears, and even made a scratch. Finally, it seems like you're mad. Taken clicked his tongue as he looked at Muyang, but Muyang didn't care. Rather, it was more important to figure out the sound of a sword the man talked about. 20 times. It was the number of times Muyang was killed by the man. It was the first time in his life that he had felt this hopeless. Up until now, if he was stopped, he somehow made a way, but the problem he was currently facing was beyond that scope. In the position where he was the assassin, he had already died 20 times. He thought he could do it. However, a wall blocked him. What you do want from me? Motionlessly, Muyang looked down at Anguish. He thought he had a higher chance with Anguish than the wicked god's sword since he used it longer. In reality, Anguish was the weapon he grew fond of. However, there was no reply from Anguish. It was expected. I'm crazy. Muyang quietly laughed. Then Taken spoke. From here you need to walk. This ice wall has the power to drive out the evil spirits. Muyang raised his head and looked at the frozen wall that shot up towards the sky. As he approached closer, the wings that were made of evil spirits were getting weaker. The land of God King Orus. In the past, there was an elf called the God King Orus. He became the world tree itself and planted his roots in this barren ice land. However, there were only a few elves who knew of this place. It was his priority to find the gatekeeper, who protected the world tree. Muyang and Taken made a detour to walk around the ice wall. Then, due to a sense of someone's presence, the two stopped without having to say who first acted. Someone's here. Bug. No monsters. Like us, there are 3 of them. The trio who wore black clothes and tilted their black broad-brimmed hats forward. They also noticed Muyang and Taken. Hyungnim, what should we do? I think it might be better for us to get rid of them before we move on. We need to find the world tree as fast as we can. Let's go. The 3 turned their backs. And they climbed the ice wall as they started to run up towards the sky. A way to run on water, it was the extended version of perfect water walking. After recognizing them, Muyang couldn't help but knit his brows. Sword Bone Trio of the Lawless Clan. One of the 5 great clans, the Lawless Clan. Among them there was a trio called the Sword Bone because they were the ones who were crazy about swords. Sword Bone. Especially the oldest brother, Sword One. He was in the top 10 humans, one of the strongest people. They clearly spoke about the World Tree. Muyang held Anguish tightly. However, the one who possessed the Orus's throne was a completely different person. What happened? Did the past change? He had no idea why the Sword Bone Trio was currently here. However, he was certain about one thing. That they were both after the same thing. Muyang's heart started to beat faster. Anytime, anywhere, Muyang always thought of the worst-case scenario before he acted. And if he was to bump into the Sword Bone Trio? Impossible. He couldn't win. Due to the fight with Dark Dragon Barca, Muyang lost most of his undead. Not just that. At that time he had a chance to fight and work through it because he had over 20,000 dwarves, a huge castle wall and 50 magical barriers. However, it was hard to get that assistance now. If it's the Sword Bone Trio, they were strong enough to easily hunt a dragon. Muyang's current fighting power was definitely not weak. You could even say he was strong enough to be included in the top 1% of humanity. However, among them the oldest brother Sword One was one of the top 10 humans. Not a 0.01% but a 0.001% being. And they were famous for not letting go of an opponent they targeted. Sword 1, Sword 2 and Sword 3. And in the past I assassinated Sword 3. They weren't brothers who shared the same blood. However, they were closer than blood. They were crazy about swords but their bond was tighter than anything else. When Muyang lived as an assassin of the Forest of Death, he had assassinated Sword 3. It was the request of Alexandro Quintart of the Sun Guild, and it was to keep the Lawless Clan in check. After the Great Calamity, with the head of the Lawless Clan as the center, they united, managed their crisis well and continued a steep growth which made the Sun Guild feel endangered. Because of this, Sword 1 and Sword 2 went violent. After a long 3 years of relentless persistence, they destroyed 5 chapters of the Forest of Death. In the end, the Sun Guild proclaimed an all-out war against the Lawless Clan, and in the turmoil of it the two also died, but, if that didn't happen, the foundation of the Forest of Death could have faltered. The Sword Bone Trio is after the World Tree? He needed to find out why. However, no matter how much he thought about it, he had no idea why the Sword Bone Trio was here at this time. The land of God King Orus would have become known after a long while later. It was all thanks to humans facing elves and hearing about the legend. To know about the land of God King Orus, you need to meet a spirit and then an elf. To do this you need to do something before and after. To elves, the land of God King Orus was like a legend. Only a very few elves knew of its existence and lived in large cities where normal elves gathered. And to enter those cities, it was required to make contact with spirits. Friends of spirits weren't easily approachable even by elves. If they weren't elves, humans would never be able to enter their city. To enter, the only way was to crush them through a war. If the future had changed, it was probably due to my actions. Muyang rubbed his chin. If there weren't any more people who returned from the future, all of it would have been the results of Muyang's actions. However, Muyang has not spent much time among humans. Muyang also only influenced a small number of people. So who would have found out about the land of God King Orus and told the Lawless Clan? By looking at how they were after the World Tree, it seemed like they also knew about it. Taken, who stood by him, spoke. Muyang, there are humans who are quite strong. As he looked at the frozen wall the Sword Bone Trio climbed, Taken placed his sword back in. Muyang erased distracting thoughts and replied seriously. There are lots. More than what you think. Is that true? I didn't expect you to say so. I thought humans were an easily frightened and weak species. To see that there are humans who stimulate my fighting spirit, it seems like it isn't completely true. As if Taken realized something, he nodded his head. It was so. Humans weren't weak. Just all the strengths were scattered and were used to fight each other that they weren't used properly. If they were to unite, they wouldn't have fallen behind in vain. However, it was also impossible for them to unite as one. Muyang calculated as so. Besides that, Muyang, is a world tree really at a place like this? I don't know what God King Horus is, but if it's the world trees, I know a bit. Like the word implies, isn't it a tree that supports the world? The place where everything gets conceived first. It was incomparable to the pum tree, the fire tars enshrined. The world trees were trees that supported the world. That was why the world trees were not visible by normal eyes. It was a spiritual existence. Only the gatekeeper who protects the place knew how to see the world trees. To be honest, Muyang also didn't know much about the world trees. It was because he had never seen it before. He had only heard that it existed. In the underworld there were 6 world trees, and it was told that among them 3 were managed by the demon gods, 1 by the elves and 1 by an ancient dragon. Of course, the one that was left was at this place, the land of God King Horus. Taken, we need to find the gatekeeper before they do. But there was something that the current Muyang was better at than the Swordbone trio. Muyang was a master at finding things. 1 move or as much as 2 moves ahead of them. The Swordbone trio was good at, but they weren't better than Muyang. Muyang took a deep breath and started to move. He didn't have time. All the gatekeepers were required to have a knack at protecting, but if a gatekeeper was supposed to protect something that wasn't visible like the world tree, he would require more private security. It would probably be hard to find by a normal method. How about you release a flying type undead? If I release specters, we could probably search every inch of this place. He certainly did have a point. But it didn't seem like the gatekeeper of the world tree would be found by a simple search. Muyang decided to start searching from the lower parts. He might feel endangered and hide in the deeper parts. If he ever decided to hide, it would be much harder to find him. There is no use in hiding. Muyang interrupted Taken. Taken, I heard that the world trees were managed by elves. Is that right? You're half correct and half wrong. It was sort of common sense to believe that the world trees were owned by elves. However, Taken said he was only half correct. He asked because Taken said it was the place where the first conception takes place, but it was quite unexpected. Then, the world trees that support the world were originally managed by the elves and the ancient dragons. Since the world trees bore new species and eggs, they needed strong species to protect it. And since they could also stay at the sacred ground, it was good for both parties. The world trees make new species? You didn't know? It was the first time he had heard of this. Well, there wasn't much that humans knew about the world trees. Taken was one of the sovereigns of the Azura's path. He was a predator who managed a numerous number of specters. It wasn't strange for him to know something that no one else knew of. After looking at Muyang's expression, Taken scratched his cheek before he continued to talk. It might be misleading to say new species are created, since there is another theory that says that they recreate things that existed in different worlds. Only the high elves or the ancient dragons would know the truth, but high elves and ancient dragons, they were both very small in number and very powerful. Transcendental species that surpassed normal elves and dragons. They were monsters that lived for more than a few thousand years. For a gatekeeper here in this Iceland, which species do you think he is? Taken was well informed compared to Muyang, at least regarding the world trees. Muyang humbly accepted the truth and asked. Taken shrugged his shoulders as he talked. Not an elf. Even if he was a high elf, he couldn't live in a place like this. Although their magical powers are absolutely pure, their bodies are too weak. On the other hand, ancient dragons could live here, but there is no good reason for them to stay here. It's because dragons are naturally born with hot energy. You think he might be a third species? You don't even need to go as far as a third species. If he settled in a place like this to protect the world tree, it is highly likely for him to be a half-dragon type. A mix with the blood of a high elf or a devil. Taken seemed quite certain. Not a devil. Muyang was also certain that he wasn't a devil. This place was part of the demon god's territory, but it was in a more remote area than where devils lived. Indeed, at the edge of the world, a few 100,000 devils lived together. Then he must be a half-dragon type species. Half-dragon type. Muyang sat for a moment. More haste, less speed. If he acted rashly, there was a chance that he might get further from his goal. So Muyang checked from the bottom. What should he do to find a half-dragon type species that has blood from an ancient dragon and a high elf? If the gatekeeper inherited both characteristics, his strength should be close to a transcendental species. If he decided to hide, there was a possibility that even Muyang wouldn't be able to find him. Muyang thought of the details of finding God King Orus's throne 1. In the past, the owner of the ring was a completely different person. The monster scholar Kim A-hin. A woman who studied monsters. She would be in the top 10 most eccentric people. However, how she earned the God King Orus's throne and information about it wasn't written in detail in her history. Just that, found the gatekeeper. Through a bet with him I found God King Orus's throne, was written. Naturally, histories were like that, but it was necessary to think about what monster scholar Kim A-hin might have been doing when she found the gatekeeper. She had learned about this land and gained curiosity about how the monsters lived in such extreme land. This was the coldest land compared to any other place. In this land where an abominable snowman couldn't even live in, there were other monsters that lived in this place. As a scholar, she probably gained curiosity. As she started her research, she probably found the gatekeeper. How? Muyang looked at a long-haired bear from afar. It was a grizzly type, but it was much bigger and had a thick hide. As he carefully followed the path the bear went, he was able to find it eating a blue mushroom that was buried under the snow. Name: blue mushroom. Description: mushrooms born from the snow spirits. Constant use of this mushroom will purify magical powers and allow you to gain strong resistance against cold. This is it. Blue mushroom. Just to be certain, he watched other animals and monsters, but they all ate the same blue mushrooms that were buried under the snow. Resistance to snow. However, Muyang paid more attention to the first part of the sentence. Purification of magical powers. Half-type species have chronic problems with magical powers. Half. He meant mixed. Since it became one with another species, there was no way it didn't have any side effects. Usually, from birth, there were lots of cases where their magical powers were tangled up. If it was severe, it might make them go crazy and lead them to self-destruction. And Taken said the gatekeeper of the world tree would most likely be a half-dragon type species. You could say that the characteristics of an elf and a dragon were completely the opposite. Compared to his strength, the side effects would have worsened. To purify it, he might have settled at a place like this. The monster scholar Kim A-hin also would have researched about the blue mushrooms and coincidentally found the place where the gatekeeper was located. There is a chance that Orus might also not be a pure elf. If he was a normal high elf, there would be no reason for him to plant the world tree at a place like this. The place where most of the blue mushrooms are located. That's where the gatekeeper is. Muyang's eyes sparkled. He found a clue. The blue mushrooms were mushrooms born by the snow spirits. Of course, there was a high chance that he would be located at a place with lots of snow spirits. And Muyang could feel the spirits. Since he possessed a completely different strength than the good-natured strength of the spirits, he could clearly know it better than others. Found it. A smile crossed Muyang's lips. After pass through a complicated cave, he was able to find a house made out of ice. Muyang was certain that this was the gatekeeper's house. Although the sky was completely visible, it seemed like there was something magically done to keep it from being visible from the outside. And since Muyang was barely able to notice any difference, it was an incredible skill. It's been a long time since a visitor has come here. As he opened the door and went in, a blue-skinned, long-eared man was in a chair and welcomed Muyang. At least there was no hostility. Relaxation. Muyang could feel a distinct relaxation that only strong individuals could have. It truly has been a while. There must be a reason why you looked for me, right? I came to make a bet with you. Then the man widened his eyes. It seems like you heard it from a high elf. Who is it? There shouldn't be many high elves who know I'm here. Even more, there should be far fewer people who know about the bet. The source isn't important. That is true. Now let's introduce ourselves. I'm Swell, but he concealed the fact that he was a gatekeeper. Since it currently wasn't important, Muyang didn't think much of it and replied. Muyang. Good Muyang. And beside you is your pet. Do you have a death wish or something? As Taken acted up and backlashed at the man, Muyang stopped him. Swell, I want a different fight. That's right, you mean a bet? If you lose, you become a frozen statue. Do you also know about this? Clap. Swell clapped his hands once. Then in the snowfield outside, hundreds of frozen statues popped out from the snow. Muyang looked outside for a moment before he nodded his head. I am aware. But if I win, I heard you will give out a treasure. What kind of treasure do you want? God King Orus's throne. Oh ho, that. It seems like you truly are well aware of me. Then there is a reasonable bet for it. He wasn't really suspicious about Muyang. For him, the bet was all that was important. Swell took out a fist-sized blue mushroom from Swell's pocket. Let's say the person who finds the biggest blue mushroom wins. The time limit will be by sunset. You move first. I will move after 6 hours. For a moment, Muyang blankly looked at Swell. He felt like he had a similar conversation before. Merlin. It was so. How similar was it to the conversation he had with Merlin at the Blue Temple? Even the fact that he likes bets and that prideful tone made out an absolutely spitting image of him.